What's happening, homie? We are back, and today we are at the Valley of the Sun Criterium in Phoenix, Arizona. Category 4, not my race, it's my buddy's footage. Average power, 220 watts, averaged about 28 miles per hour, probably around 45K. And fun fact, the average human is 3% bacteria by mass, kind of weird, right? So yeah, this isn't my footage, this is my buddy. His name is Christian, and he's racing in the Cat 4s. Comes from a aerobic background. Dude's a monster. He weighs like a $120. Dude is very light, and this is a pancake flat crit. But let me tell you something, man. He tears it up. He does really good. He follows a lot of really good key tenets of bike racing, and it just does a very good job of handling his bike. I think that's probably the one thing I think is most impressive about this footage and him as a racer is like, it took me a while to get comfortable handling my bike, and I've seen this guy rip some descents like no other. The only thing holding him back is because he weighs so little. He just doesn't get up to speed like everyone else does. But he takes some ripping lines for sure, and he actually pops off a super good sprint. We'll see at the end of the race. He just makes a couple tactical errors. And I know you might be thinking, you might be like, dude, you haven't posted in like literally 45 days right after you said, oh, I'm going to start posting more consistently. You're right. So I am actually going to start posting more consistently now. Just been a really busy guy back home. Kind of racing locally has been crazy. It was really fun to come back with some good fitness, but we'll get there. I have some stuff in the works. I have my footage for this race coming in real soon. It'll actually be 1 week releases for probably the next 5 or 6 weeks, and maybe a couple weeks with two videos in a week. So please subscribe and like if you want to see more content like this. But let's go ahead and jump ahead real quick. So I said earlier that Christian does a really good job of racing his bike, and I think that is very true and demonstrable in this video. First things first, he is at the front, and I've seen so many 4s racers listening to him after they race. When I was racing in the 4s. And they would always say, oh man, I was too far back, or I missed the move because I wasn't near the front. Let me tell you, there are advantages to sitting in the back of the field. Those advantages are generally a better draft, and you get to kind of ride a little bit smoother if you do it right. But you can also ride smoothly at the front. And I would also point out that this guy is doing less than 200 watts. He weighs like a $120. This is where you want to be. He's not doing any energy. They're going 30 miles an hour, and I would say, a lot of people are too afraid to be at the front. Sitting 5th wheel, 6th wheel is fine. You're still going to get a great draft. Generally in a Cat 4 field, you're not racing fast enough for it to be like 33 miles an hour, and being 5th wheel is like very hard to hold the wheel, right? So, don't be afraid to get towards the front. And also, don't be afraid to be close to other riders, which in these two corners, they do a really good job of. You can see everyone's really fairly packed up, and Christian does a good job of just kind of floating to the left instead of overlapping wheels really heavily or having to brake behind that guy. Now, you got to be careful when you overlap the wheels, of course, but all in all, he does a very good job of riding smooth here, staying off the brakes. The goal is don't brake. And I mean, I've talked to him before, and just, I play this game with myself when I race, is like, I want to race without touching the brakes for as long as I can. If I can go through most corners without touching the brakes, I did a good job. Now, he doesn't do a great job of sticking on the wheel there, but he very quickly reinserts himself into the pack. And these are just a lot of things that a lot of Cat 4 riders don't do, which I think he does a great job of, is assert yourself. Now, don't hip check someone if there's no need to. Don't be bumping people for no reason. But like, look at this line. He just takes such a good line, and he's very smart heads up. He just gained 15 positions for 100 watts. He averaged 100 watts up the left. Now, does he immediately follow it up with a boneheaded, awful line? Yes. Does he have to now start pushing 400 watts to keep his position, when if he just took a little bit better line, he'd be keeping good spots? Yes. But that's easily fixable. Keeping your head up the road is probably the number one thing most Cat 4 riders don't do. And look what it allows him to do. We're now 10 seconds later, there's a move going, and he's able to follow it for not too many watts, right? He does a really good job. And then he notices, and I do this too, and it pisses people off, and they really, they get mad at me for doing this. He notices this rider on the right is also pushing to get on that wheel, so he just slows down, and he just plays chicken with them. It won't always work. Gets a little bit easier ride though, right? And you got to think, well, that's worthwhile. Now, maybe it would have been a little bit easier had he just stayed on the power, but it's tiring out your competition. It's making other people do work. It is exactly what you want to do as a solo rider. We jump ahead here, and he makes a move here where he picks up the power because there's another 2 guys going up the road, and he realizes, okay, well, if that gets away, it's gone. Probably should have snapped a little bit harder. You know, if you look back, he was only doing about 500-600 watts. This guy can do 800 for 5 or more, especially in a race. But I think he realizes that, and that's another thing, is when you're if you make a mistake, that doesn't mean you have to keep making a mistake. You can stop. You can say, well, you know what, that was a bad idea. Those guys aren't going away. Let me slow down. And he does that. He recognizes that, oh, this isn't going anywhere. Someone's going to bring this back. And a few seconds later, people do. He does a really, really good job of what NorCal Cycling says, right? He says, you should know what you're doing at that moment and why you're doing it. And if at any point you realize, I don't know why I'm doing this, then stop and think for a second. Does a great job there. Those 2 guys get brought back. He doesn't do a monster effort to bring it back, and everything's good. Everything's neutral, right? And that's something I think, again, a lot of Cat 4 racers lose. They think they have to chase everything back down. And sometimes you do, especially in smaller fields with teams. Sometimes you do, in fact, just have to chase everything down. But here, that's just not the case. And one thing I will say is, with it being a stage race, being at the front does not punish you nearly as much. And you might be like, well, why is that the case? Especially in a Cat 4 field, you're going to notice that everyone's fairly tired. You had a 20K TT, you had a 40-mile road race with multiple big climbs, and by big climbs, I mean it's big for like American standards. It's like a 6-minute effort, about 2 miles, right? And so overall, everyone's a lot more tired. So normally in a race like this, Christian, 120 pounds, he's going to struggle when an attack comes over the top because they're going to be coming past him flying, and he's going to have to do a lot of watts to get up to speed, right? But in a stage race, you don't get punished nearly as much because those bigger guys, they had to do a lot more work the day before. Like in terms of just calories burned, those bigger dudes are doing way more calories and kilojoules than Christian is. So he actually stands a really good chance to have a good sprint here, and he positions himself well enough to pop off a sprint and be very competitive when it goes. And that's why I think being towards the front here for him is a good idea. It prevents him swarming, it prevents hard accelerations, and just knowing him as a rider, he generally does better if he can ride more smoothly to the finish and then pop off a sprint like most. And so we're going to jump ahead here, and we're with 1 lap to go. Speed's picking up. He's positioned himself on the correct side of the course. The crosswind's coming from the right, if I remember correctly. So he's actually getting a pretty good draft. Immediately gets into the tailwind, so being on the inside isn't nearly as bad as it was on the final straight, which is about 350 meters, just a heads up. And so he's doing a good job here. There are some guys going off the front. You can see them in the footage. The one thing I will say is, in a Cat 4 race, man, it's hard to stick it for 2 minutes. It's just tough. Like, not many people are going to have the fitness to go do 450 watts or 500 probably needed to win on this style of course. He takes a bad corner there, but he recovers, stays calm. A lot of people are going to start freaking out, maybe start popping off a sprint way too fast. We had actually talked about this before the races started, is that this back straight is very good to move up on. We'd actually watched some footage from someone else prior. And so he does a really good job of that here. So you're going to notice he's sitting about 20th wheel. He's actually like way too far back, right? But not really, because it is a Cat 4 race. There's no control. You have time still. It's not panic mode yet. It will be panic mode in about 200 meters. But he finds a really good wheel to move up on. This guy right here in front of him is about to pull out, and he takes the outside line, and he's actually gaining positions. He gains like 10 spots here. I know he doesn't do it quickly. He doesn't have to do a hard effort. He just stays calm. He finds a good line, and he moves up like a legitimate 15 spots. It's a great tactic, and he just like made the right decision. Overlaps wheels a little bit there, but it's okay. The guy swings wide. And here's where he makes his final mistake. You got to start sprinting right here. He's sprinting hard, but not hard enough. He's not opening it up yet. And he has no wheel to follow. But it's a Cat 4 sprint. It's hectic. He's able to pop something off. He gets in the wheel. It's a little shaky. And he opens it up, and he times it pretty well, because he ends up coming around a couple guys, 2 or 3 guys in the final sprint, only doing about 700 watts. Had he immediately started sprinting out of that final corner, I think he gets a top 3 in the field sprint. He ends up taking a 7th or 6th, I think, out of a group of 40 or 50. You know, the competition down there is a lot higher. Dude's a monster. He's only been really riding for like 7 months, maybe 6 months. Gives the hand a little wave to make sure the GoPro's still on. Does a great job. Dude's going to be killing it. He'll be winning mountaintop finishes here soon. If you want to see more, like, subscribe. Deuces.